dun 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 G'day, cheers. Believe it or not, one of the most common beers I get asked how to brew is an Australian lager, whether it be VB or 4X or Tooheys, probably got them in the wrong order, or a Carlton Draught. And you know, I see people ask the questions in forums and they just get hammered by people. Why would you want to brew that? Why would you? And you know, they are the biggest selling beers in Australia. Maybe if you wanted to make some money, brew a beer, you should brew beer well like it. No, but there's another reason I brewed this beer, and that's a good mate of mine passed away in January, Dave. And we've probably seen the first sort of trial batch of this in the double batch I did in a previous video. Anyway, I brewed it again, single batch in the 35 litre Brewzilla, and it's for him. And look, I even made a t-shirt. You can buy them if you want. Dave's Bitter Death Whale, because he was known as the Death Whale, and it says on the back, Throffin, because that was his favourite word, Throffin. If you had something good, you'd go over to visit him and he'd say, oh, I've got this new Ozzy Osbourne record, mate, I'm frothing. Yeah, that was his saying. That's why it's on the back. Anyway, let's get into it. It's a pretty simple recipe. The original was 1 base malt and just Pride of Ringwood. The second one, I added a tiny little bit of crystal for a bit darker colour. It is still fairly light. It's a gold, somewhere between a gold and a straw. And also, it's night time out here, so it looks a bit darker than it is. It's a bit hard to see. It is crystal clear. I did use Biofine in it. This was the video I did on Biofine, or not so much on Biofine, it was about flushing your kegs and using sodium metabisulfite, and how to add a clarifier, whether it be Biofine or gelatin. Look, a lot of times I don't bother using them, and I didn't purposely use it for this beer. It was just happened to be, this beer was ready when I was making the video. But you know, it doesn't hurt, and it just makes it look even more like the real thing, without having to wait a month or two for it to clear properly. Of course, in the video, I'll mention what ingredients I used. I sort of pushed the Pride of Ringwood at the end of this to get it a little bit more VB tasting. You might say, oh, these beers only have a 60-minute edition. Yeah, but you'll never clone a VB. It's very technical, the way they make it. And you know, some people might say it's not technical. It's they brew a higher gravity wort and then they water it down later, and then they add an ISO hop or something at the end that gives it some more bitterness and some flavour. And it's really, really hard to match that with traditional brewing styles in your garage. So that's why I threw some Pride of Ringwood at the end. If you're not so keen on that, yeah, don't do it. But you just use a 60-minute edition. We'll go and take a look at how I brewed it, and then at the end I can discuss a few more things on how you might change it, because if you don't like VB, you might like, you know, Tooheys or something like that. You might just use a slightly different hop. Starting with 4.5 kilo of Gladfield ale malt, and I was going to do it all ale malt. You know, I might add a little bit of sugar if my numbers need it in the boil, just to be traditional for an Australian lager or an early lager. And I'm thinking I might add just a little bit of crystal for colour. I thought I had some Simpson's Dark, which I don't. I was going to add 100 grams of that. I've got some Simpson's Medium crystal. I'm just going to add 150 grams. I don't want to add too much. But just to give it a little bit more colour. So 4.5 kilo of Gladfield ale and 150 grams of a medium crystal, Simpsons I'm using. If you've got a dark crystal, just use 100 grams. There we go. I'm just adding some simple salts. You probably could leave this out, but it's 5 grams of calcium chloride, 1 gram of calcium sulfate or gypsum, and 1 gram of Epsom salts. Just make the beer a little bit more malty. Also help adjust my mash pH a little. I'm going to add some lactic acid. You could use acid malt. 88%. I'm going to add 6 ml. It seems a lot, but it should get our pH in the right spot. Without it, our pH was going to be up too high. Around 5.6. That should take us down to 5.2. Just a note on these things if you're new, these clamps, they're great, but they're not meant for turning. If you try and spin the fitting, they'll come undone, and that's just the way they've been designed. That's the way they are. I could probably get away with this recipe without any rice hulls at all, but since I've got some here, I'm going to add some. You can pre-rinse them if you like. I don't measure rice hulls or weigh them, I mean. It's just a couple of handfuls here and there. It would probably be less than 200 grams all up. 150 grams or something. Maybe not even that. They don't weigh much. So if I start at 70 and I want the mash at 65, it gives me a good few minutes to stir, and I'm not having to worry about losing too much temp. If you live somewhere where it's really, really hot, you might need such a range between your strike temp and what you want your mash temp at. Because your grain will be hot, the water, everything's hot. We're coming into winter now down here in Melbourne. So the grain's a bit cold, everything's a bit cold. It's nothing to stress too much about. If someone can think they can taste the difference between a beer mashed at 65 and 66, they probably deserve a medal or something, an award. I don't know. But, of course you want it close. That looks pretty good. I'm going to give that 5 minutes. I'll give another stir, probably a little one, and then we'll get the pump on. That is 5 minutes. Don't worry, that's not this boiling. It's my HLT heating up the sparge water. That looks pretty good. I probably don't need to stir. I was happy with the mixing before. I'm not going to go right down the bottom. It just looks good. Can't see any dry spots. I think we're ready to go. Turn on the pump. I turn on full just to clear it a bit, just for a second, and then I'll turn it back. I reckon we're not going to have any issues with this one. So probably about a half from the start, and I think we're going to be okay. Keep an eye on it always. If I see it building up, I'll turn it down a bit and give it a stir. I think we should be okay with this. The messy way. There's been nothing to see here. It's actually been 15 minutes. I'm going to take my reading for pH just to check it. I have been checking to make sure it hasn't risen up, and it hasn't. Flowing nicely. I just take about, people have asked how much I take, it's about a third of a cup or something, maybe a little bit less. Just enough to get the pH meter in. Probably a third of a cup. And that goes in the freezer for 15 minutes. 5.22. I could go a little bit lower, it's still settling down. But yeah, I think we're there. Happy with that? If anyone ever wonders what I do with it afterwards, I whack it back in. Them's precious sugars. Let's have a look. Look at that, nice and clear. It's a little bit darker than the last version, only a touch. Good. It's probably done now. That's been 45 minutes, but look, I'll leave it an hour. There's probably no real need to. Looks like it's ready to go. Alright, that's the hour up. I am going to mash out, so I'll just ramp it up to 76, leave it for about 15 minutes. Just under 30 litres. I probably could have went a little bit more, but I'm happy with that. Some firm cap will stop any chance of boil over, or if I actually get it in, not on the handle. That should be enough though. $12 grams of Super Pride for 60 minutes. 10:43. So we come out a little bit higher than I planned, so I won't be adding any sugar to this one today. I could like boil shorter or maybe add some water, but I think I'm just going to run with it. 10:45 was supposed to be the post boil, so I'll probably end up with around 10:47, 10:48. That's okay. There's just a little over 10 minutes left. I'll put in some wire flock and some yeast nutrient. There's 10 minutes to go, and I'm adding my 20 grams of Pride of Ringwood. You could use Super Pride as well, but Pride of Ringwood's a bit more classic, isn't it? If you were to use Super Pride, you would use less. Alright, that's it. We're at the end of the boil. Just going to turn it off and let it settle down for a few minutes before you want to start any pump or anything. Go to get the chiller started. Oops, wasted beer. $10.47, and that's okay. We're still going to be around that 5% mark. It depends how far out it ferments, but it's not going to be far off that 5%. So we've come out a little high. My groundwater still isn't real cold yet, unfortunately, but that's okay. I'm just going to leave it in here till it gets to about 18, then I'll put the yeast in. This yeast will work happily at 22, so I could put it in now, but I'm just going to wait, and then I'll ferment it at about 14 or 15 degrees for about 4 or 5 days. I'll just see how it's going and then I'll start ramping it up. It's all over the place at the moment. It's set at 1.5 right now, but I'm going to change that. I was cold crushing a beer in here before. I'll put it down to 15 to start, and I'll just see how it's going. And the reason I do that is it can sort of like overshoot. So it'll take it down to 14. If I had it at 14, it could get down to 13, a little bit lower than where I want it. So if I set it at 15 for now, I can fine tune it a little bit later. If it overshoots a little, it'll only go down to like 14 or something, you know, and I won't be too worried about that. I love my fridge. It's about 2 hours later. We're down to 18 degrees. I'm going to pitch the yeast now. You could probably get away with 2 packets, at least 2 packets. Don't use any less than 2, but I'm using 3. I love to give my lagers the best start they can get. I've set that at about 8 psi. It'll go down a bit because it's still cooling, but that'll be fine. I really wanted to get my wireless hydrometer, my tilt, into this ferment to show you how it went. And I went to put it in, and then something wasn't working. The battery was flat. Now I spent a little while trying to find a new battery, searching the house, and I couldn't find one. So I pulled out my Floaty device. A Floaty is like an ice spindle. After mucking around with them a few times, I find the Floaty device a better design than the ice spindle. But that's for another video. But you can see by the timestamp there, it was just after midnight on the Tuesday that I actually threw the Floaty in. So it was probably about 4 or 5 hours after I'd put the yeast in. So the yeast went in on the Monday. Friday morning I woke, and you can see at 9 o'clock it was at 1.021. I usually ramp my lagers at 1.020, about 1020, so 1021 was fine. I bumped the temperature up a little bit. You can see there by the blue line going up. It was just a couple of degrees to about 16 degrees. The next day, you can see there in the blue, I bumped it up again to 17 degrees. Hopefully you can see there that it didn't actually stay at 17 for very long. I needed that fermenter fridge, and I knew this ferment didn't need cooling down anymore, it only needed warming, so I could pull it out of the fridge, I could leave the heat belt on it, and I could still use my temperature controller to keep it at temperature. What I didn't realise, that the next day, even though, you know, we're into winter, it was a very warm day, and so it actually got up to around 19 degrees, but that's fine. So I left it there for a couple of days, and you'll see the readings seem to get really low in the red there, and that was just a bit of gunk. I mean, I was having a look at the fermenter, and it was well and truly fermented. There was no more crowds and no more bubbles or anything. But it just wasn't quite reading right, and you'll get that happen with all these. It doesn't matter whether it's a tilt, an ice spindle, or floaty like this one. Sometimes it gets a bit of gunk on there, and because they've got a bit of gunk on them, they don't give you quite an accurate reading. But that's okay. I knew this beer was done, so you can see there I cold crashed it. So the ferment took about 7 days. There's no need to do an extra diacetyl rest when I'm already at 19 degrees for a couple of days anyway. That's done. And this particular batch of beer was the one in my oxygen-free transfer video that I've just did recently, where I added some biofine to it as well while I was kegging. So if you want to see that, there'll be a link down below. The biofine took 2 or 3 days, and so that's it out of the fridge. And you'll notice it's set to about 19.5 degrees, and that's because that's what it got up to naturally from the warm weekend we had, and so I didn't want it to drop temp. So I set the Inkbird to the same temperature as what it got up to. So as you can see, it's a pretty simple recipe. It's a good one for beginners. If you do have troubles with head retention, you could try using carapils or something. I don't bother. Even the version I did without the caramel malt still held a head. But you know, there's nothing wrong. If you want to put in a little bit of carapils, that's fine. If you want it more like a, if you were going for like a 4X gold or something, you might drop the alcohol a little bit. You would leave out the crystal probably, or drop it right down so it's the colour's a little bit lighter. You might go for a hop like cluster. A good friend of mine beefer in South Australia. He brews a 4X gold clone. I think he will share the recipe. If he does, I'll leave a link down for it, down the bottom for it. He uses a little bit more ingredients and uses cluster and things like that. Cluster's another classic hop. As you saw in this second one, I used Pride of Ringwood for bittering, mainly because, you know, it's higher alpha acids, and I didn't have enough normal Pride of Ringwood to use for bittering and for flavour. People think Super Pride is just like tastes the same as Pride of Ringwood. I don't think it does. I've said this story many times. I was at Beechworth Festival, the Fresh Hop Harvest Festival one year, and I was sitting there watching the kids play on the blow up castle thing, and I was sitting next to a lovely lady who asked if I'd want a seat because she was watching her kids too, and the next minute that happened to be Dermot from Beer Co.'s wife. Now next minute Dermot's up tapping me on the shoulder going, try this. Anyway, I tried it. It was IPA. I could tell it was an IPA. It was fruity. It was nice. It ended up being the best, freshest IPA of the festival, we thought, and it was all with Super Pride. It didn't taste like VB. You know what I'm saying? Super Pride's a great hop. So if you do use Super Pride for bittering and you go to use it for flavour, it is much higher alpha acid, so you'd probably drop it down a little bit. The flavour addition, you might only put 5 or 10 grams in. But then again, it's up to you. But if you're trying to make it like VB, yeah, you wouldn't put much Super Pride at the end because it wouldn't taste like VB. And another thing I'll say, don't forget your roots. I grew up drinking Tooheys, VB, Foster's. We really didn't have any choice. People and kids these days are very spoilt. The only other thing, Cooper's was around. There wasn't much else I could get in New South Wales at the time. I think when I moved to Melbourne, there might have been Redback. If you went to the brewery, I'm not even sure you could buy it anywhere else. But so that we didn't have choice back then, and we grew up on it. We spent a lot of money on it, and we learnt to love beer drinking it. Yes, your tastes change, but you know, don't be shy if you like these beers. If you get a chance, go to CUB, watch how they make it, or go on the tour. It's very, you'll learn a lot. It's very technical. And if you try to do it at home, don't just water it down using, like if you try to do what they do and brew a stronger beer and then put water in the keg to water it down, don't do that. You'll oxidize your beer. They deoxygenate. They take the oxygen out of the water before they mix it and do all these things that it's a little bit harder to do at home. Not impossible, but I wouldn't bother. Just brew the beer and drink it. I think you'll like it. It's a good one for your granddad. It's a good one for your dad. It's a good one for you. It's a good one for me wife and me sister. Anyway, I'll give it to me daughters in a few years. Anyway, thanks for watching. Cheers to Dave. Dave would love this. Dave's bitter. Take care. Australian lager. Get into it. Cheers. That's a hard-earned thirst. Cheers. Oh, and for those that hang around to the end of the videos, because not many do, but for those that do, I was out. Where was I? Oh, we had a big night at Sister Moore's, or a big afternoon at Sister Moore's. Oh, we sort of behaved ourselves. Then we walked down to Hop Nation, had a few beers there. Then we thought it was a good idea to go to Bar Josephine in Footscray after that, which probably wasn't a good idea. Although there was some nice beers. And you know, that shuts at 1 and I came home, it was 2 or something by the time I got home. And I had a few of these because I'd had this shirt on for the day. It was the first one I'd first got this shirt. And I took a photo and showed me mates that I'd, made a t-shirt and made Dave's beer. And I was a little bit tipsy. And I woke up in the morning And I went, oh God. I didn't remember that last beer at the end of the night, you know. I just didn't even think about it. I sort of woke up hazy, go, oh, gee, that was a big day. Awesome, good day. Then I went, oh, was I drinking VB all night? I go, well, I don't remember drinking VB. And I looked down next to the bed and it was like the old days. There was half a glass. And, you know, I hadn't finished the glass. I was sitting next to the bed. I went, oh, God, that's right. And that's all I could taste was like that Pride of Ringwood VB thing. So, and that's one thing that made me go, all right, this beer, you know, I've done the right thing. Because if you wake up with that VB bitter and Pride of Ringwood taste in your mouth, you've got it. All right, cheers.